Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Bhastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachani Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paskachade Satarani. I'm speaking today from Chaitanya Chaitamrita, chapters 16 and 17, which contain the pastimes of the Lord's education and early life. The Lord was so proficient in his education that at the age of only 11, he started his own school. As soon as the Lord took the position of a teacher, many students came to him, every one of them astonished to hear of his mode of explanation. After a little while, the Lord took a journey to East Bengal. In East Bengal, he met the Brahmana Tapan Mishra. Tapan Mishra very much desired to understand the absolute truth, but he was bewildered. Simply to become a bookworm or read many books and scriptures, and even to hear many commentaries and instructions, will not produce real knowledge of love of God. Tapan Mishra was thus directed by a Brahmana in his dream to approach Nimai Pandit, Lord Chaitanya. The Brahmana in his dream told him, undoubtedly, because Lord Chaitanya is the Lord, the Supreme Ishvara, undoubtedly he can give you proper direction. After having this dream, Tapan Mishra took complete shelter of Lord Chaitanya's lotus feet and became one of the great devotees of Lord Chaitanya. One of the most prominent events in the Lord's early life concerning his education and scholarship involved the great teacher, the Kashmiri. Keshava Kashmiri had traveled all over the world, and everywhere he had defeated everyone. He was known as the one who defeated people in every direction. When they met, Keshava Kashmiri said to the Lord, I understand that you are a teacher of grammar and that your name is Nimai Pandit. People speak very highly of your teaching of beginners' grammar. Prabhupada points out that to be an educated person really means to understand Sanskrit. And to understand Sanskrit grammar, he says, would take 12 years. Therefore, the Kashmiri said, I desire to hear your skill. Lord Chaitanya said, my dear sir, whatever you are a very learned scholar in all sorts of scriptures and very experienced in composing poetry. I am only a boy, a new student, and nothing more. Therefore, I desire to hear your skill in composing poetry. We have heard this, that if we could hear this, if you would mercifully describe the glory of Mother Ganges. The Lord praised him, saying, Sir, there is no greater poet than you in the entire world. Your poetry is so difficult that no one can understand it but you and Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. In this way, the Lord replied to Keshava Kashmiri sarcastically. Lord Chaitanya indirectly minimized the value of his poetry by saying, yes, your compositions are so nice that no one but you and your worshipable mother, the goddess of learning, can understand them. Keshava Kashmiri was, in fact, a great devotee of Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning. But Lord Chaitanya, who is the master of the goddess of learning, has the right to speak sarcastically of her devotee. In other words, Instead, although Keshava Kashmiri was proud of being favored by the goddess of learning, he could not know that she is controlled by Lord Chaitanya himself, because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I therefore ask you to explain the meaning of one verse. We can all hear it from your own mouth and thus be very happy. Digvijay inquired which verse he wanted explained. The Lord then recited one of the 100 verses Keshava Kashmiri had composed. That verse says, "The greatness of Mother Ganges was brilliant, always brilliantly exists. She is the most fortunate because she emanates from the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. She is the second goddess of fortune, and therefore she is always worshipped both by demigods and by humans. Endowed with all wonderful qualities, she flourishes on the head of Lord Shiva." When Lord Chaitanya asked the Digvijay to explain this one verse, the Digvijay replied, "I recited all my verses like the blowing wind. How could you completely learn by heart even one of those verses?" Lord Chaitanya replied, "By the grace of the Lord, someone may become a great poet. And similarly, by his grace, one may become a great Shrutidar, who can memorize anything immediately." Prabhupada points out that the word Shrutidar is very important. Shruti means hearing. Formerly, before the beginning of Kali Yuga, almost everyone, especially among the intelligent men, the Brahmanas, was a Shrutidara. As soon as a student heard the Vedic wisdom from his master, he would remember it forever. Therefore, there was no need to refer to books, and therefore there were no written books in those days. The spiritual master delivered the Vedic hymns and their explanations to the student, who would then remember them forever without consulting books. Prabhupada says to become a Shrutidar, one who can remember simply by hearing, is a great achievement for a student. So Keshava Kashmiri was satisfied by the Lord's statement and then said, the Lord then said, "Now kindly explain the special qualities and faults in this verse." Keshava Kashmiri said, "There's not a tinge of fault in that verse. Rather, it has many of the good qualities of similes and alliterations." Lord Chaitanya said,
महाप्रभु ने कहा,
"My dear sir, I may say something to you if you will not become angry. Can you explain the faults in this verse?" The Lord then proceeded to explain some of the intricate rules of grammar and to show that the verse indeed violated these rules of grammar according to alliteration, etc. He particularly pointed out that the statement that the word vibharati flourishes is incomplete. Qualifying it with the adjective abhuta guna, wonderful qualities, creates the fault of redundancy. And then he said, "Everyone knows that the lotus flower grows in the water of the Ganges. But to say that the Ganges takes birth from a lotus flower seems extremely contradictory." But Lord Chaitanya pointed out, in this birth of the Ganges, by the inconceivable potency of the Lord, there is no contradiction, although it appears contradictory. Srila Prabhupada points out that the central point of all Vaishnava philosophy is to accept the inconceivable potency of Lord Vishnu. Therefore, what sometimes appears contradictory from a material viewpoint is understandable in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is because he can perform contradictory activities by dint of his inconceivable potencies. Very often Srila Prabhupada would talk about transcendental mathematics, which also seemed contradictory. He would say 1 plus 1 is equal to 1, and 1 minus 1 is equal to 1 in the spiritual world. Modern scientists are puzzled. They cannot even explain how such a large quantity of chemicals has formed the atmosphere. Scientists say that water is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, but when asked where such a large quantity of hydrogen and oxygen came from and how they were combined to manufacture the great oceans, they have no answer.
इसके लिए उनके पास कोई जवाब नहीं है.
That is because they are atheists who will not accept that everything comes from life. Their thesis is that life comes from matter. Where do all those chemicals come from? The answer is that they are produced by the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Living entities are also part of the Supreme Godhead, and from their bodies many chemicals come. For example, the lemon tree is a living entity. It produces lemons, and within each lemon is a great quantity of citric acid. If, therefore, even an insignificant living entity, who is but a part of the Supreme Lord, can produce so much of a chemical, how much potency there must be in the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Scientists may not be able to explain where the chemicals of the world are manufactured, but we can explain this perfectly by accepting the inconceivable energy of the Supreme Lord. Since there are potencies in the living entities who are samples of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, how much potency there must be in the Supreme Godhead himself. As the Vedas say, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. He is the chief eternal of all eternals, and the chief living being among all living beings. Unfortunately, atheistic science will not accept that matter comes from life. Scientists insist upon their most illogical and foolish theory that life comes from matter. This is quite impossible. They cannot prove it in their laboratories. They cannot produce even a small speck of life by their combination of chemicals. We, however, can give thousands and thousands of examples illustrating that matter comes from life. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita says that as soon as one accepts the inconceivable potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, no great philosopher or scientist can put forward any theory to contradict the Lord's power. Any questions? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare